and welcome to Adaptation, the vlog where we talk about film adaptations and the original material they are based on. I'm Kendall Bryant, and right about now you're probably like, Kendall, what are you doing? Halloween is over and I'm so embarrassed for you. Well, that may be true, but we still have one Halloween-related loose end to tie up in the form of the film Horns. If you've been following our social media, you might have noticed that I wrote a review of the novel Horns last month for Riverrand Press, which you can find in the description. And now I'm here to talk to you about the film. I'm going to stay spoiler-free for the first part, so if you haven't seen or read it, then don't worry, I will warn you before I start talking about spoilers. If you don't know, the film Horn is about a guy named Ig, played by Daniel Radcliffe, who is suspected of killing his longtime girlfriend Marin, played by Juno Temple. We learn through flashbacks how Ig and Marin met, dated, and then very loudly and publicly broke up. So that's kind of why everybody thinks that he killed her, even though there's no actual proof. Then one morning, Ig wakes up with horns coming out of his head that have given him some kind of special power over people so that he can get them to admit what their most twisted desires are, or admit things in the past that they've done that they're really ashamed of. While the appearance of the horns is pretty disconcerting at first, Ig realizes after a while that he can use these powers to possibly find Marin's killer. Now, this film isn't really getting the greatest responses. It's got 6.6 stars on IMDb, 42% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 46% on Metacritic. And I'm not really surprised. But not because I didn't enjoy this film. I just think this story is gonna have mixed responses no matter what. For starters, it's extremely dark and pretty indecent. I mean, it earns every inch of that R rating, but if you can handle it, I still think it's really worth watching. The film had a really hard job to do in balancing the fantasy aspect of the horns with the really gritty, realistic situation of the plot, plus the sweetness of Marin and Ig's past with the revenge-driven plot of Ig's present. And they did a really good job with that. I could have maybe done without the scenes where Juno Temple is in slow motion surrounded by pastel gauzy fabric that is supposed to show us how pure and beautiful she is, but in the long run that's a fairly small complaint. I think the real complaint with this film is that they made it too obvious who Marin's killer actually was. At this point, experienced moviegoers know what it means when the camera stays on that character for that extra 2 seconds, and Horns does it 20 minutes into the film. So if they were trying to surprise anyone, they kind of failed. But the friend that I saw this movie with said that it didn't actually ruin the experience. Even in knowing or suspecting who killed Marin, it's really in the figuring out why, the lead up to the event, Ig figuring out that it's that person, and then enacting his revenge that still makes for a really interesting film. And if all that didn't convince you, just go see it for Daniel Radcliffe. I mean, really, what can't he do? And now we are about to enter the spoilery section, so if you are not okay with the book and the film being spoiled for you, click away now. I thought they would never leave, but now that we're alone, we can talk adaptation. I've already said that I enjoyed Horns as a movie, but I'm not so in love with it as an adaptation of Joe Hill's novel. However, I'm not sure it would have been possible to adapt this novel to my satisfaction. My favorite part, and by that I mean the part that disgusted me the most, was in the middle of the book that you actually get to be in the killer's head and hear all of his gross misconceptions about Marin's actions. It's really disturbing, but it makes him super creepy. I did hear from someone that hadn't read the book that they still kind of understood that Lee had some seriously deep-seated issues. But I'm just not sure that it was enough for me to like point out this creepy theme that was running through the book of how Lee thought Marin was into him and she had given him no indication other than, you know, being a good friend to him when his mother died. Which, by the way, was not in the film. They took out the whole part with Lee's mother, and they actually had him save Ig when they were kids, which just kind of takes away from the whole fact that he was an actual sociopath. I suppose you could argue that it comes across better that way when he's a little bit more sane, that it's almost more disturbing, but I'm not quite sold on that, so tell me what you think in the comments. Speaking of themes, if you've read the book, you know that there's a pretty intense religious plotline in it that they completely neglected in the film. I'm guessing they thought it would be too controversial, and they would probably be right, but I still think it does a little bit of a disservice to the original work to have that plotline completely removed. And since we're complaining about things, I also really didn't like the demon that Daniel turns into at the end of the film. I kind of understood why they felt the need to make him more menacing, because in the book he just kind of has this like red skin, but he looks rather normal. It's actually in a way less fantastical in the book. Instead of turning into this big, huge beast, he just kind of gets cleansed by the fire. And even though I know that it would have looked completely ridiculous on film, I will forever mourn the fact that we missed the opportunity to get Dan in a blue lace miniskirt. There are actually a lot of like little things like that in the book that were just too weird and they had to change for the movie. Like the treehouse of the mind in the book, it's not really there, but they made it physical in the movie because that makes sense. Also, there's Ig's whole sermon thing and Lee stopping the moon from falling out of the sky, which I'm not even sure I really understood in the book. But still, what I'm saying is that despite my disappointments about certain things not making it in, I actually think the filmmakers did a really good job kind of trimming away the stranger parts of the book. But I still liked the book better. But now it's your turn. Tell us what you thought of the film in the comments. Tell us what you were disappointed they cut if you've read the book, or what your favorite part of the film was. Make sure that you follow us on all of the social media, which is linked in the description, which is also a great place to come and talk to us about horns, and by us I mean me, because I'm the only one that has read it and I need to talk about this, please. Also check out our podcast on iTunes. Until next time, make sure that your devil is wearing a blue dress.